Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Welcome back to Sugar and Spikes, a science-backed and semi-sarcastic thoughtcast for a new type of business leader. I'm Dez. I'm your resident serial content creator. I make all the things, do all the things.
I can't follow that. I just can't.
And Tammy's a psychologist.
And Tammy's blah.
You know what? At least we don't live in the Borscht Belt.
Oh my goodness.
I was really trying to tie in Borscht Belt.
Now all I can think of is the stupid veggie burger with bacon.
We're done. Okay, but anyway. This week, God help us, it's because it's a Thursday.
Yeah, I feel like it's Friday and it isn't, and it's just like thrown my game off a little bit.
It's a weird day.
Yeah. It's been pouring stop. Pouring stop.
Much like life.
Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I look outside, I'm like, oh, it's sunny. No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
I feel like we need to start over. I don't know why. I don't know.
You never let me start over. You never let me like edit
That's
stuff
not
out.
true.
It is true.
I don't do the editing.
You're in charge.
This isn't my show.
But it is.
This is our show, and we're both very capable of talking to the editor.
Are you telling me to be assertive?
Hey, speaking of editors, that made me think of, no, not you, Siri. That made me think of last summer when we actually decided to bring in an editor. And how things were kind of a shit show, and that was when we brought in reinforcements.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so instead of like any sort of clever segue,
You just forced it right in there.
And I thought it was kind of okay.
No, it was fine.
No, so it was pointed out that not this last episode, but the episode before, we said we were going to talk about what does it look like when shit is burning down all around you, and you need to call in reinforcements, calm their troops, circle the wagons. When you realize that life is nothing but hell and pain, and you need help.
But you need to have a smile on your face somehow.
And be productive. Which, I mean, doesn't necessarily speak to last summer, but let's talk crisis. Well, there's a difference. Here's one thing I've been thinking about. There's a difference between like an emotional crisis and a objective things are burning down, things are going very, very bad type of crisis. So we're at 2. I thought that I was talking about 1, but that's 2. So there's an emotional situation. There's an external situation that's just plain bad.
Yeah.
And then there's it's just so busy.
It's like
type
levels
of
wing sauce heat.
Yeah.
1 fire, 2 fires,
or like different
3
doors.
fires. Like you always get the 3 fire one.
I think of it almost like doors, because I will say, the idea of levels kind of speaks to one is worse than the other, and I'll go out on a limb and say all of them can be shitty in their own right.
Oh, totally. I do not mean to suggest that there's somehow like an emotional crisis doesn't feel worse than like
So like department store levels where, I mean, really the third floor is the same as the first. It's just, instead of shoes, it's menswear.
right. You're like, how did I end up on this floor? I'm on the wrong floor.
Where are the handbags? Somebody. So, okay.
So yes, they all suck in their own way,
Yeah.
and you have to kind of deal with them a little bit differently, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes an emotional crisis can be an actual physical, real world, things are burning down crisis.
Well, so yes, they can be integrated because a real, like an emotional crisis can stem from even like a stressed out crisis. So while there are three, this is almost like the Christian concept of the Trinity.
Oh no.
While there are three
Which
very
you still
separate
haven't
ones,
helped me to understand.
so
I
it's
don't get it.
it's 3 in 1.
What? But different, but the same. But
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, like each one can not. I'm not talking about the
It's-
Trinity,
But this
like,
is
going
more
back
like
to, like, the
yes
situ-
and, right?
Yeah.
This is more
Mhm.
like it's a dialectical tension
Mhm.
where it's the same and different at
Yeah.
the same time.
So yeah, they can be standalone. They can also fuel each other.
Yeah.
So today, whatever time we have, we wanted to address bringing in help and asking for help for any and all of these options.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about how like sometimes when you're in the middle of stuff, you don't really realize how much it bothers you
Mhm.
until it's kind of done and you kind of have some hindsight because you have
Mhm.
nothing to do but deal. You have to deal somehow,
Mhm.
and you can do that in more effective ways and less effective ways. But sometimes we think we're dealing with it.
Mhm.
And then when we look back on it, we're like, oh, yeah, that wasn't good.
Mhm.
I didn't feel good. I wasn't doing well.
I wasn't making healthy choices. Yeah. We actually touch on that a bit in the book.
Mhm.
And in the book I provide a very clear example of that.
Mhm. I can think of several.
Mhm. Whoa. Name one. Show your work. Show me the Carfax.
Hey, Tammy, I know you're in class, but I just called 911 and your dad's on the way to the hospital in an ambulance.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I'm Dez's ride, so I guess we're leaving together.
Yay.
So we left together.
Oh, we're talking about things burning down. I thought we were talking about poor coping skills.
Oh. Whoops.
Very, very much on the same page.
Poor coping skills?
Mhm.
Okay.
Like things that seem okay, but then later on you're like, oh shit, that wasn't the best.
So we've talked about how, like, in crises, I tend to get angry
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like rage towards solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, and I can say this in all truth, I am not the most in touch with my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a work in progress, as we all are in
Mhm.
various ways. And so I can just put a lid on that shit and go down the road,
Mm-hmm.
right? Life has taught me that.
Mm-hmm.
Military's taught me that, right? I have lots of lessons that have
Mhm.
taught me how to do this.
Yeah.
And so I will do it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think I'm dealing with my feelings. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine. But then I'll look back and I'll be like, oh, yeah, no.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll be like, are you really?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be like, yeah. And you'll be like, I don't think so,
Mm-hmm.
as evidenced by.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like a blinding mirror up to my face. Right? So, like,
Yeah.
you're my send in the troops, call in the troops, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes we don't even know to call them. We don't
Mhm.
even know that things are that we're in
Mhm.
need of that.
Yeah.
So you have to have like someone who can hold up that mirror, even when, it's difficult. It's difficult to do that.
Well, and I think going back to the idea that they're kind of standalone things, the three areas that we kind of opened with, they are so, they can be so integrated that one's going to eventually connect with another. And between those going on, you're going to end up seeing results and getting messages that things aren't going so great.
Yeah.
At some point.
Mhm.
And I think that really like the very first piece of it is having that awareness. Is it the holding up a mirror, like that one friend that's just like, hey, guess what? Or is it like noticing, oh, these projects aren't getting done, these things aren't getting done, things like that.
Well, yeah, there's
Oh,
different levels, there's different ways, there's different
mhm.
needs and times for that whole like
Mhm.
spectrum of things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's having first it's the awareness piece, but then it's also there's a difference between being aware that things aren't going right and taking responsibility around them
Or taking action.
or taking action.
For me, like, take responsibility. I don't know. To me, it's like, I think people are really doing the best they can.
Mhm.
And I don't think if you would ask people if they're taking responsibility, they might feel like they are. So I don't want to judge them because, like, I could say, okay, maybe you're doing the best you can. And that means you need to do better.
But like I think that it is, unless you can come up with a better word for it, I think that, so say things are going really bad and they're doing the best they can, there's a certain level of ownership in the and this isn't done. There's a different
I see
level
what you're saying.
of, oh, I know, but there's also this like level of responsibility where it's, and I'm not doing this.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay. That makes more sense to me.
Mhm.
I would use the word, for personal reasons,
Mhm.
I would use the word accountability.
Mhm.
Taking accountability, which I get. Please don't tell me it's like basically the same thing. I understand that.
Mhm.
But for my own reasons,
Mhm.
I use accountability. So taking accountability.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. So move on.
So, well, that was kind of the second kind of piece to it of, okay, really kind of owning that, taking that accountability moment. And then at that point, because the difference is, and maybe this is just in my mind, but the difference between knowing it and taking accountability for it is, well, I see it, but then once there is accountability, then it's, and what can I do about it?
Right. So action steps.
Mhm. So
I was just thinking about that as you were
Mhm.
talking. We're always like on the same page.
We get there eventually.
We get each other.
It may take
We
a
take
while.
different roads, but we usually end up in the same place.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think for me, like, it's a recognition of, I feel like I'm doing the best I can and I know I need to do better.
Mhm.
So then you're like, how can I do that?
Yeah.
And it really might be like rallying the troops.
Yeah. And maybe it's not even necessarily doing better, but I think there's also a moment of, does it matter? And I think specifically around, if we're thinking like situational occurrences, whereas like you're really busy. Like in the book we talked about, like I go into the example of last summer where I was really busy doing one job and the podcast became much more inconsistent and everything.
Yeah.
And it was this idea of, well, does it need to? Like just having that very honest moment of, do I do better or do I let it
Right.
sit? You know?
Yeah.
So I think before the do better, there's also a moment of decision. that needs to happen.
I think with entrepreneurs, though, like, that's a really hard choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, maybe if you're working in an organization,
Mm-hmm.
you have PTO,
Yeah.
you have FMLA, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
options.
Yeah.
But when it's you and you depend on you and your
Mm-hmm.
family depends on you and your employees depend on you,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to make those choices
Yeah.
because I would think you just feel like everything's important. You
Mm-hmm.
have to do it all. You have to.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to be a routine after a while because it can be super scary to put something aside, um, especially if we feel like it is all on us,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and maybe it's not the thing that's failing or the thing that isn't getting the attention, but it's acknowledging, well, maybe it's something else that needs to be put aside so there can be a room.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
But for
going back
type
to the
A
idea,
achievers,
everything.
that's a hard lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Like,
Yeah.
that is hard to
Mm-hmm.
say, you know what? You're right.
Yeah.
I can't do 100% of what needs to be done right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to somebody who's like super type A and a high
Mhm.
achiever, you might as well have just told them that they're a complete failure.
Yeah. It's very much an all or nothing thing.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be like that,
No, absolutely not.
which is like one thing that I always think of is my brain always falls to, well, it's either going to be like this or it's going to be like this. Like there's one of two options. And then I try to always challenge myself on the, well, what are the third and fourth options?
Mm-hmm.
Because
So it's not either or.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like
Which is more realistic.
there are very rarely true times where it's either an all or nothing thing. It's
rare.
just, it's what our brains jump to in the beginning because our brains are lazy as fuck.
Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We may be high achievers, but our brains, not so much.
Yeah.
Well,
We're
yeah.
fighting biology on that one.
I mean, I think when this really catches up to me, I mean, I struggle with this too, is when I'm sick. When I'm sick and I feel like I can't go to work
Mm-hmm.
and I can't come over here and I have to just drop some of the things I'm doing. I'm not laughing at that because it's super inappropriate. Her cat is
Well done.
all up in my business.
Yeah, they're having moments.
We are. Oh my God. I'm sorry. Okay. So I struggle with this too, particularly when I'm sick, because I really physically can't do it all in that
Yeah.
time. And I'm just like, that's just so against my own personal view of myself and my abilities.
Mm-hmm. It makes you see your humanity.
Yeah. I'm just like, oh, yuck. Like,
What is this?
Don't do that. But, you know, it doesn't even necessarily mean it feels good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I think it's hard to make decisions where it doesn't make us feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might call that like the lesser of two evils or something like that. But when we're making a decision that doesn't have like this blissful, amazing outcome. So kind of like what we were talking about last week, like being pragmatic and
Yeah.
like those aren't fun decisions.
Yeah. No.
So when everything's burning down around you and you're deciding which bag to put down, that doesn't feel great.
I mean, and here's the thing, and kind of the challenge to that for folks is maybe it doesn't feel good right now, but what choice is going to let you feel the best 30 days from now, 60 days from now?
Oh no, completely.
Things like that,
right?
you know?
So like if you can't get out of it without someone getting hurt, and I know you know what I'm talking about, then how do you minimize damage?
Exactly.
But it doesn't feel good when everybody ends up damaged and one person ends up more for the sake of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be with people. It can be with situations too, like
a project's going to take a hit.
right.
Which
Which one is it going to be?
Mhm.
And how do you minimize damage even if everyone is going to take some?
Yeah.
You know? But those are the hardest decisions to make. Those are
Mhm.
agonizing decisions.
Which is why the whole calling into troops thing comes into play.
Right.
Which is why we're kind of bringing it back around to that piece.
Well, yeah. So, like, I've had times like that where
Mhm.
I'm like, you know what? I really need Dez's support. I
Mhm.
really need you to, like, not even to, like, hold up a mirror, but just
Mhm.
to be like, you're doing the right thing,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
When you're making those hard choices. Like, and I know that there have been decisions in my life where if I didn't have your support, I wouldn't have been able to do it because I
Mhm.
had to have one person who was like not going to be objectively hurt by my decision to
Mhm.
say this makes the most sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Mhm.
So that's
Well,
my 2 cents.
and so I guess like for actionable pieces and for folks to apply this,
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of walk through these things and I choose the example you're using because I finally got there.
Yep.
Um we always get there eventually.
Yeah.
Um
As evidenced by this entire podcast day.
Oh God. You guys, I'm sorry. If we had something else to release instead of this, this would be a bonus episode.
Oh my God.
But we're kind of short for episodes. So thanks for sticking with us.
And enjoy.
If you're like new, it's normally not this bad.
Don't start with this one.
We're normally a little scatterbrained, but
Recording on a Thursday.
anyways, now that we're on the same page with situations.
Yep.
And to make it a bit more applicable for everyone, so if
Yeah.
people have things that they're taking away, how do you decide, like, who your troops kind of are? Like, I think everyone that has listened to it, especially these last few episodes, has heard us go off on, like, sometimes you can't, and, like, everyone at this point, we're all on the same page. Sometimes, you need to bring in other people. How do you decide?
I think for me, it's the one I trust the most
Mm-hmm.
to tell me like it is. Like,
I
I
was
don't
just
want to
looking
hear.
for you to say really good things about me. I realize how that question sounds.
I mean, it's you. It's you. It's Des. If anyone wondered, it's her. But here's the thing.
Mhm.
It's you because you're not going to say, everything's going to be okay.
Mhm.
Like, you're going to be fine. Everyone will get through that. Like,
Mhm.
no, you're going to say to me, you're right. There's no good option here.
Mhm.
So, what are your choices?
Yeah.
And how are you going to decide?
Mhm.
Knowing that it's kind of shit.
And that is why advisors in business and business partners, like true, like on like the partner level, are so important. And we touched on this a little bit last week. I don't know if we really like hit that message home, but having someone else to like walk you through those kind of thought patterns and that process is key. And you will not get as much benefit out of those moments if it's a random coach or consultant that you hire.
Or you haven't had a relationship with them for a long time,
Mhm.
because I can speak as a therapist. I
Mhm.
am that person for my clients
Mhm.
and clients that I've been seeing for a long, long time. And we
Mhm.
have a very strong long-term relationship. It makes sense that I could be that person,
Mhm.
right? Because I think back, like we were talking about Parks and Rec. I don't know if it'll make it in the episode, but we were talking about it.
Yeah.
So I think of that where Leslie, like, Ben brings that chick from DC in to
Mhm.
talk to her. And the one thing she says is, like, I'm telling you the truth because I don't love you. I don't care about you enough to lie. Right? She's like,
Mhm.
you can do bigger and better things. Like, you've outgrown this goal that you're trying to reach, right?
Yeah.
Because she wants to go back to city council and all of that. Sorry, everybody. It's that kind of day. So that's what you need. You need this person who isn't trying to spare your feelings, who isn't trying to like be a supportive, it's going to be great. Like, it's all going to be okay. Like, no, you need someone who can be like, it's not. And so how are you going to minimize the damage?
Yeah. Or like things aren't okay. Yeah. Here are the next steps.
Right. Or at least be able to be a sounding board, right? Because you don't want to make these decisions. I think if you take away nothing else, you don't want to make these decisions on an island.
Yeah.
Right? You need to have a trusted person that you go to who you know will help you figure this out.
Yeah.
Therapist, friend, mentor, business partner, advisor. Those are the people.
Which is why one of the longer running themes lately has been building those relationships.
Right.
You know,
and how key that is. Yes.
Because I think so often, especially like in entrepreneur land and everything, it's very much just like I'm blazing my own trail, and it feels very I am an island, like one woman show. I do it all, one person show. I do all these things, and that's in no way sustainable.
Right.
Like we've talked about.
It just isn't.
Things get too busy, emotions come up. I mean, we've done a handful of episodes about like depression, anxiety, and how entrepreneurs are much more common to experience those along with other diagnoses. Like personal crises, all those things, they come
all the
up.
crises.
Yeah. Which is why I think like from scratch having somebody, and the people can change
or be different for different situations.
Yes. Like my version of calling in the troops that I've been kind of like lightly using throughout this whole episode was when I needed help editing the podcast and getting the podcast up last summer because I was so focused on one very specific large work project. So I tapped someone in to edit and to write the abouts, and I handed over a lot of control for that. But it holds true in it was somebody that I trusted. It was someone that I'd worked with, like I knew their work ethic, I knew these other things. Right. And so I could hand that over.
Yeah.
Because with so many things that we're building, there is an element of passion and care. We've talked about it before. Your business, your creative outlet. It's your baby.
Yeah.
You're not just going to hand it to some random.
No.
So that's kind of a very like business example. And Tammy's been talking about like more of a personal example. Right. The concepts hold true.
Yeah, and I think it's great to talk about. It's not just like these horrible personal crises. It can just be like, I cannot possibly look at my to-do list and get it all done, and I have to somehow get it all done. So how am I going to deal with that? I can like hand it off to, what can I hand off to other people? What can really wait? What can't? What am I going to be okay if I don't get this really done? How can I reframe this so I don't feel so bad about it? Like there's lots of different ways to do it, as there are situations where you're going to need to do these things. Right. And so it can be something like I couldn't do the editing and I handed it off, but I handed it off to a very trusted person, all the way up to, hey, this feels shitty. Tell me I'm making a good decision. Not necessarily even the right decision, a good decision that I have thought through.
Yeah.
Like I'm not just doing impulsively. Like I have thought about this and it sucks. And this is the decision I'm going with. So right spectrum as all things are really.
And I think the other piece is when it comes to picking the person and seeing kind of this cycle of, let's coin the term cycle of shit. Because that just sounds appropriate for this episode.
I thought you were going to say cycle of shame. I don't know why. It doesn't fit with anything.
I refuse to use that word. I was working on the book last night, and like the only word I can think of for this sentence was shame. And I was like, I'm not using that word. Like, I'm not.
Thesaurus.com.
I think I ended up rewriting that sentence.
Like, don't get me going about shame.
Yeah. Anyways, what was it? Okay, yeah, cycle of shit. There we go. Yep. I knew that would pay off. Didn't know it would be so soon. Is like the aftermath, the after decision. The 30, 60, 90 days from that point. Um for me and for kind of more of the businessy task oriented things, it was I didn't do a good job of this because I didn't make the decision to bring someone in with the thought of an exit strategy.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about like stopping points and stuff in the last episode. I didn't really think of, oh, they'll be doing it for a bit while this is going on, and then I'll take it over. I could have.
Yeah.
It became kind of an ongoing thing, and honestly, it's been one of the best things I've done. It makes my life a lot easier. Because really, like, for anyone that hasn't edited a podcast takes on average 3 times as long as the episode to like edit and stuff. And then if we're talking like pull quotes and things like that for promotions, 4 to 5 times as long as whatever the episode is, give or take. It's super time intensive.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just because I'm slow. You know what, guys? Tell me if your timing is different. I'd love to hear if there are like shortcuts. Anyways, all this is to say, I didn't have an exit strategy, which was a poor business person like perspective.
Well, just no, stop. It's not effective as it could have been. And yet we've talked about this is how we learn. So we're like, oh, we should have talked about an exit strategy.
Great learning curve.
Right? And so like sometimes I was even thinking of it. My brain is like going in so many directions today. But sometimes we feel like, okay, I handed it off and we didn't talk about me taking it back and we didn't talk about an exit strategy. So now I feel like I have to leave it out there even though I could, I'm ready. And so sometimes we feel decisions are more final than they are. And so really decisions, I would hope that people can think about it this way. Decisions are like a decision tree, if you will.
Tell me more.
We think a lot of times, and I hear this all the time, well, what if I make that decision? I'm like, but you can change your mind.
Oh, that's one of the biggest lessons I learned in these last few years, 2 or 3 years by now, was learning to be okay with changing your mind.
Yeah. Like, okay, let's take just like a big example. I'm moving to Indiana. What if I don't like it there? Okay, you can always move somewhere else. Like, it doesn't mean that once you move there, that's where you are.
Yeah.
Right? And so we tend to think of it in final ways like that, concrete ways like that. A lot of people do. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot of people do. And so we feel trapped in decisions when really it just leads us down another path with different choices. And so it isn't like, oh, what if it's the wrong decision? No, what if it's just a less effective decision that you need to alter or adjust later? You can totally do that, right? I mean, and it goes from like really kind of silly things like, well, what if we, like taking just a really basic client example for me, well, what if we go to every other week and it isn't working? Well, we'll go back to weekly. Yeah. It'll be fine. And they're like, oh, okay. Right? So like, once somebody sees me every other week, it doesn't mean that it's forevermore. You can only come every other week.
When I think about that in terms of habits too, and I know we're going down like a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I think whenever we try out new things, or when I try out new things, not to put that on anyone else out there, this idea becomes well, then I have to do it all the time, or I'm never doing this again, like especially with like diets and stuff, then this is just done. You know? And it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't.
You know, like you can change your mind for any of the things and all of the things. And I think that with the podcast editing example, I think it would have occurred to me sooner if things hadn't been working out. I think that we can also get feedback from situations.
Oh, yeah.
And because that did work out so well, it just seemed like an organic choice
Mm-hmm.
to continue down that route
Right.
because it let me get more things done.
Yeah. And so even though you thought about, hey, I didn't do a very good job of planning for an exit strategy, and also this is working the way it is. So even though you can take lessons from things that work very well, like, oh, I didn't think about this, and that's okay. Like, you can in future times still use that information.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like everything's going shit and that's the only way you learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and oh my God, writing the book and doing the podcast is blurring really well right now. It's about making a point to step back and learn those lessons. We talked about awareness for when things aren't going well at the beginning of the episode, and really, in order to be successful and to continue to grow, it does take a certain level of consistent and habitual self-awareness and check-ins.
Yeah. Diversity of perspective. One of the few things that I will say is always a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure someone will challenge me on that, and that's fine.
Oh, do it.
Because it's a diversity of perspective.
Do it. Do it.
I'm still right. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, even when decisions ultimately lie with you, even when you're the person, the business owner, you're the one ultimately making the call, it's still a good idea to have multiple voices telling you things to help you consider so you can make the most effective choice you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a spirally route for my example. What about like kind of the more extreme kind of personal rallying the troop situation where then it's like, okay, things have calmed down, and kind of like going back to the grand cycle of shit. I wish we could call this episode that, but we can't. It'll be this hidden title. But yeah, like what advice do you have for folks that are kind of navigating I think I may be able to breathe on my own, and I don't know kind of moments?
So I always say little changes lead to big sustainable changes. So if you think you're ready to try it on your own, how can you take that step to try it out and have a safety net around you for if that doesn't go the way you expect, right? Or if you're dealing with emotional aftermath of shitty things that you're not going to correct that necessarily, just remember to be gentle with yourself and then you have the supportive person there who says, you know what, this is really hard and I believe in you. Or this is really hard and I'll be here as you continue to move through it, right? Like that's when you lean on your emotional people and as you work through that and all the shitty feelings that it may have created. And just recognize that when we have those more difficult, shitty feelings, that they're there for a reason. They're telling us something. And so thinking like, I should be handling this better, don't do that. Think like, hey, considering I'm handling this pretty well. Because sometimes feeling sad, feeling mad, feeling like sorrow, despair, any of those kind of on the harder to feel feeling side of the line are appropriate for the situation. And so just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean you aren't doing a good job of managing it.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I also think that there's a certain level of trust that comes with those people like that are kind of that are your go-to sources where there may also be like this challenging level where there needs to be a level of respect to hear the things that like they have to say. Because I'm thinking about like these negative feelings and negative emotions, and yeah, for the most part, like 95% of the time, they're going to be like, feel your feelings. They're also going to be the people that are going to smack some sense into the situation and be like, we're done with this. You need to move on.
Move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I would agree, like there's a time and a place, right? You feel the things, you're starting to cope better, right? You think about like things like adjustment disorder, where a big change isn't going to feel great. It's going to be hard to deal with. There's going to be stressors, and yet you expect recovery at some point.
Yeah.
So when you get past the point of, like 6 months and recovery hasn't happened, then we're starting to look at what other supports need to be put in place to help you move forward in an effective way. So therapy, whatever that may be, a friend being kind of more of your whatever it is. I always go to therapy because that's just my thing. But like whatever it is, it's going to help you to be unstuck from the thing that you're in right now and move forward is really going to be valuable.
Yeah. And even if that person who's saying, hey, it's been a minute, even if you know in your heart of hearts and I still need time, all it is feedback.
Yeah.
Even with these people that you trust and have these like ride or die sort of relationships with, at the end of the day, things do fall on your wisdom, because any message, any advice, any recommendation from someone else means absolutely nothing if I don't want to say it means nothing, but it doesn't do anything to your life if you don't act on it.
Right. Well, the thing that I was thinking about is that what is making them say this to me? Like, why is this their perspective? Diversity of perspective. Like, my perspective is that this has been really difficult and I'm still dealing with it and it's really hard. And your perspective is, okay, we got to have a talk. So how come we're coming to very different conclusions from the same thing? And like the reason I say therapy is because a lot of times that is as far as your trusted others can go with you on that journey. And so you have to call in someone who has the professional abilities to help you manage that, right? Like you can take a medical example too. Like you have a fever and your parents are taking care of you and you're not getting better, not getting better, not getting better, not getting better. Okay, well, there's a limit to that. And now we're going to bring in the doctor and we're going to see what we have to do to make it better, right? So it's the same idea. If you're on this emotional journey that has been stormy and difficult and your friends are like, "Oh, I can't go any further with you here," then you have to call in people who can help you with that.
It makes me think of how many conversations we've had with each other where it's like, and therapy.
I know.
And then we just like put it to the side.
Well, I think
no man's land.
I mean, we've both been in therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be like, I'm a therapist. I've never gone to therapy. Like, then, okay, I guess I don't really believe in what I do.
I mean, everyone should be in therapy at all times. Like,
right? Like, all the time.
I think we've talked before. I'm like, how cool would it be to have like a space for an hour a week where you could just go and say whatever you wanted and have literally no repercussion?
Right?
Like,
and maybe feel better.
Oh my God. We talk about living in the land of privilege, but that is just like the height of it all, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is time for that. Those are the professionals to help with that.
Yeah.
So, if your ride or die people are saying, I don't know what to do, this is beyond my expertise, I don't know how to help you, you need to listen to that too. So, all roads lead to therapy.
Yep. I was trying to think of something clever, but I couldn't.
Sorry.
No, that's cool. No.
But I can say this too. You can get therapeutic value from advisors and best friends and
other
right?
sources.
And other sources.
Like,
So I'm not necessarily saying you have to go to someone's office if you can get that in other ways. But all roads lead to therapy.
Well, and it
in
goes
some
back,
form or another.
I was going to say it goes back to that self-awareness. Like, I think both you and I have had situations where we've had like very clear breakthroughs where it's been kind of in tandem of conversations with each other, kind of awareness of what's going on, and then some sort of like media, be it a podcast, an article, something. And then it's like, oh, you know, so it doesn't have to be one. It doesn't have to be none. It can be a
You can have aha moments
hodgepodge.
from a whole mess of things.
And we hope to God you had one in this episode.
We hope. That would be the best outcome possible.
Probably not, though. Because,
No! You're always the person raining on my parade. In the very best way. Sometimes it's like rainbow raining, and other times it's like it is outside right now.
I don't know how I became that person.
But I need that sometimes, right? I need you to be like, no. It's not that rosy.
On that note, any final words?
Really? I thought you were going to say something really awesome. Call in the troops if you need them.
Send them away when you're done.
Send them away when you're done.
You use them until you've used them up.
And if they're saying, hey, I think you need us, think about it.
Then you probably do.
Maybe you didn't call them, but they need to be there anyway.
Okay, that's it. We're done dragging this thing out. It's been a beast of an episode. If you're still listening, God love you.
Take what's valuable and leave the rest.
Yep. Okay, bye.
Bye, friends.